about Sarah Baartman, Kim Kardashian, and the practice of trying on and then ultimately rejecting blackness. Sarah Baartman was an indigenous South African woman born around 1789 who was ultimately taken from South Africa to Europe and exhibited as a literal exhibit, the point of which was to put her larger buttocks on display. She was very renowned for her figure, and she was called the Hottentot Venus. The act of displaying Sarah in front of all of these white people, allowing them to touch her, allowing them to make fun of her body, allowing them to hypersexualize her was incredibly racist, fundamentally racist, and it really was kind of not the dawn, but a clear example of white society fetishizing Black women and their bodies. Sarah arrived in Paris in 1814, and just around that time, a group of writers wrote a musical comedy or a vaudeville about Sarah. The play was called The Hottentot Venus, or Hatred of French Women, and the themes are really diabolical. There are two main characters in the play, Adolphe and Amélie. Adolphe is a man who really hates French women. He's been dogged by two of his wives, and now he's looking for a wife that's une exotique or une sauvage. So he's looking for an African woman to satisfy his desires and to change things up. Amélie is Adolphe's cousin. She's recently widowed, and she hears that he's looking for a wife, so she secretly travels to the castle and hides out while she comes up with some sort of diabolical plan. The plan is for this white French woman to don kind of the costumes and the physicalities of Sarah Baartman so as to entice her cousin. She knows her cousin is fascinated with, has fetishized, and is really kind of sexually attracted to the figure of Sarah Baartman, and so she decides to wear a bustle, which is a type of kind of accoutrement under the fabric. We also know at the start of the play that the environment in France is such that the French women have started to exhibit some degree of jealousy towards Sarah Baartman and some degree of jealousy to these exotique or sauvage women because they are so enticing the French men. Amélie is very successful in her disguise, and Adolphe falls in love with her very quickly. He's besotted with her shape, besotted with the way she looks. Eventually, Adolphe sees a real image of Sarah Baartman, and he realizes that he's in fact not attracted to her. He thinks that she is in fact a savage, that she is not nearly as enticing or attractive as the French women with whom he has become familiar and with whom he is surrounded. And this was Amélie's plan all along. She takes off all of the costume that she's wearing, the disguise as Sarah Baartman, this disguise as a Black woman. She takes off the physical kind of indicators of Blackness, becomes white again, and the two fall in love and live happily ever after. The themes in this play are clear, right? We have the fetishization, the hypersexualization of the Black body, but we also have this idea of this French woman realizing that kind of being Black or looking Black is very fashionable. She deigns to and decides to kind of buy or gather the materials and physicalities that will make her more Black looking. And then when her kind of amour tires of it, she gets rid of it. Once she realizes that Blackness isn't really respectable enough or respected by the man she loves, she gets rid of the Blackness. I think we're very familiar with this cycle, right? It's this idea of approximating Blackness or trying on Black physicality to garner acclaim, to garner attention, to garner popularity. But once you've decided that you've tired of that Blackness or your association therewith, or you want to be viewed as more respectable or more successful, you take it off. And who is the best at this? None other than Kim Kardashian. When she was starting rising to claim, she did so after appearing in an adult film with a Black man. And then she was kind of known for her vaguely ambiguous looks, but she amped that up by approximating Blackness. Kim Kardashian was previously known for her fuller lips, for her fuller behind. There were in fact kind of rumors that she had done so or surgically enhanced her lips, surgically enhanced her behind. She wore Fulani braids on Keeping Up with the Kardashians. She wore Bantu knots. She wore cornrows. She got spray tans, right? She did all of these kind of mechanisms to make herself look Black, but not be Black. And she wore those as she was rising to acclaim. And I think it worked. Kim Kardashian is really freaking famous. This act of trying on Blackness did help to popularize Kim Kardashian in our national kind of memory of her. And in 2014, she appeared on Paper Magazine, the Break the Internet cover. And in it, she looks very, very similar to kind of the proverbial images of Sarah Baartman. In it, Kim Kardashian is kind of peak approximating Blackness. Her backside is very, very pronounced in a way that, again, is similar to Sarah Baartman. She is tan. She has full lips. She is trying on blackness and celebrating her own success, but she herself is not black. Recently, Kim Kardashian is kind of tired of her approximation to blackness. We're all joking that she's in her white woman era. She's much, much thinner. She's been wearing her blonde hair a lot more regularly. She wore that Marilyn Monroe gown to the Met Gala. Like, she is really kind of moving away from her blackness and getting closer to whiteness. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that this movement away from blackness is coinciding with her being regarded as a serious businesswoman, as a woman who's deciding to become an attorney. And it also coincides with the rise of conservatism and traditional values in this country. The cycle is harmful, right? Because ultimately it suggests that what is valuable about Black culture and Black people is their culture, is their fashion styles, are their trends, but not the Black people themselves. And while these people who are trying on blackness, practicing blackness, can ultimately distance themselves from it when they're tired of it or when they realize that it might be hampering them, Black people themselves cannot distance themselves from the racial contracts.
And blackness in itself tends to be a gimmick to these Europeans because that's all they see as entertainers. Thing is, with Europeans, they will never see Black people as actual people. We mean African people. They see us as props, as tools. And even when they see us beyond props and tools, it's what we can do for them, ironically, as props and tools to enhance their wealth. That's it. Eventually, even when you try to remove that pattern, it circulates back to that pattern again. And we see it a lot, oftentimes, how it plays out when people make a mockery of blackness because it's financially beneficial to them. You know, there's this lady currently on TikTok. She's an American white woman. She made braids and she wear African attires. This gives her followers. This gives her attention, right? It makes her money. But eventually, just like Kim Kardashian and the Kardashians in general, once they get too assimilated with Black people and they start associating themselves with Black men, because there's another conversation, and they start procreating quote unquote Black children, the society, which is white, it tends to reject them when they go into certain spaces, and that's not nice. They start to realize, oh my God, I am no longer associated to whiteness, right? And this is what Kim Kardashian is also experiencing with her whiteness, because she has also mentioned that she experienced racism with her kids when she was enrolling them, and she never knew how to encounter that. And it kind of like clicks, you know, that her kids are now experiencing racism. And then now, let me say racism, it's not racism. But anyway, so her kids are now experiencing racism. She now has that full sense of experience of what it means to be a Black person in America. All right? It's no longer like a mockery that you can just take off because you have all these Black kids. But why society in itself does not respect the Kardashians because of their closeness to Black people and all those Black children that they've created. I mean, I'm thinking like this of the license of a blackness, right? And no, I'm thinking in the license of whiteness, not blackness. And how whiteness tends to, it wants to put itself into this box. And now you're going to have this thing where even their kids are going to go with this identity issues, with identity crisis, and then they want to assimilate themselves or put themselves in white circles where they date white men. And the rest is history. And now we're going to see that person and be like, they are Black people with 1% blackness in them, only because they descended from Black people. But again, that's another conversation in itself.
Europeans have always been sexually deviant. In Europe, between 500 and 1500 CE, the penitentials, for example, the penitential Theodori, outlined penalties for intercourse with animals, infants, corpses, and demons, because these were rampant. Priests were caught in bestiality scandals with pigs and sheep across France and England. Guys, hit the link in the bio ASAP. I'm definitely losing the account for this one. Chastity belts weren't just invented, they were enforced. Women's genitals were literally locked by law. Meanwhile, in Africa, the Americas, and Polynesia, sex was integrated into social, ecological, and spiritual rhythms. The Igbo held erotic festivals like Omumu, celebrating fertility as a communal blessing. Hawaiians practiced Aikapu, a balanced system of gender-segregated but sacred food and sex taboos, rooted in harmony, not shame. Among the Nawa, adolescent sexuality was openly discussed and guided by elders, not demonized or hidden. Europe made sex about punishment. The rest of the world made it about continuity. Par au Cerf, Louis XV's pedophilic playground, funded by the French state, was staffed with girls aged between 12 and 15, forcibly taken or bribed from peasant families. Court records show officials managing logistics of rape as royal entitlement. Consent was a meaningless concept in a legal system where women couldn't testify against aristocrats. In comparison, Akan puberty rights, for example, Bergoro, centered girls with music, mentorship, and celebration, not shame or sexual access. Among Diné or Navajo, girls experienced the Kinalda ceremony to honor menstruation, framed as a moment of power, not perversion. The Zulu practiced Umemulo, where girls marked womanhood with dance and spear-giving, not sexual servitude. Europeans saw young girls as property. Other cultures saw them as power incarnate. The 1860 Indian Penal Code, Section 377, criminalized all unnatural sexual acts, targeting hijras, same-sex couples, and non-binary communities. In Uganda, Nigeria, and Ghana, British officials imposed sodomy laws still used to persecute queer people to this day. Gender diversity was reframed as criminality, a direct attack on existing indigenous norms. Compare that to the Bugis in Sulawesi. Indonesia recognized 5 genders, including Bisu, who held sacred ceremonial roles. Zapotec communities in Oaxaca recognized Muxés, gender-diverse people respected as caretakers and artisans. In the Pacific Northwest, Two-Spirit people were respected in their communities long before European contact criminalized them. The world didn't invent queerness recently. Europe criminalized it globally. French soldiers systematically raped Algerian women during raids. Rape was logged as military efficiency, not atrocity, photographed and distributed through colonial postcards. These assaults were consumed as softcore propaganda in Europe. French psychiatric journals published studies on native women's resistance, code for sexual disobedience. Tuareg women owned property, initiated marriage, and moved freely across public space. Berber matrilineal traditions preserved land through the mother's line. Under Islam, pre-French North African societies granted more bodily and legal autonomy to women than Victorian France. France called this liberation. It was systemic desecration. In the Americas, Jesuits banned puberty, fertility, and marriage rituals, but documented them in detail, often with erotic overtones. Mission records describe swaying breasts, open nudity, and wild dances, while demanding forced clothing and conversion. Ashaninka and Shuar people practiced ceremonial sexual unions tied to harvest and lunar cycles. Mapuche women underwent Nyatun ceremonies, where fertility was praised, not repressed. Yoruba spiritual traditions venerated orishas of love, pleasure, and sensuality, like Oshun, as divine forces of healing. The Jesuits condemned these acts as lewd. They were simply too colonized to comprehend sacred sexuality. Sarah Baartman, a South African woman, was paraded naked in freak shows, then dissected and displayed post-mortem. Her genitals and brain were kept in jars at Musée de l'Homme until 1974. Her body was studied, fetishized, and displayed in the name of science, race theory, and civilization. Among the Khoikhoi, women's bodies were celebrated through dance, fertility songs, and communal healing. Across much of Africa, larger bodies were signs of health, abundance, and divine favor, not ridicule. In Mande societies, body decoration, nudity, and dance were expressions of freedom, not shame. Europeans didn't liberate her body. They turned it into a museum exhibit, and then called it education. Europe had the archives, but the world had the wisdom. What Europeans brought to the world sexually was not enlightenment. It was disorder, moral panic, not balance, repression, not ritual, exhibitionism, not embodiment, rape, not reciprocity. Across the planet, sex was a spectrum, a biological, spiritual, communal force. Europe made it into a crime, a contract, or a conquest. Cope.